In 2021, Holly Fogle started giving cash to expectant mothers in Upper Manhattan. No questions asked. It was a small program, the first guaranteed income program like it in the country. Today it's called the Bridge Project.
And today it has expanded to 12 states with almost 4,000 mothers and babies covered for the first 3 years of the baby's life. And it has given away $90 million
Wow.
in cash. David, we are so lucky that we have the one and only Holly Fogle in our studio. We know you're in LA. We're here in New York. And I've only missed a little bit of time since the last time I saw this woman. And in that time, she's done 100 things. And she's going to talk to us about, well, we wanted you to come on to talk about the Bridge Project because we're so supportive of giving mothers cash, and it has just grown tremendously.
Well, thank you for having me. And I was reflecting back. We had talked, I think now just a few years ago. And as you said, we had started the Bridge Project in Northern Manhattan simply as a way for my husband and I to move our own philanthropic money deep into the hands of women who were pregnant and living below the poverty line. And what happened was pretty incredible because almost out of the gate, we started to see incredible data coming back from families, which, and people were like, this is radical. You're giving women cash. And I didn't
And,
think there's that
and
much that's that
very,
Crazy.
radical.
Crazy. Giving adult
crazy.
women cash. What are you
And,
thinking?
and very few questions, too, which is the part that I love.
Mhm.
There wasn't this in-depth, do you really need it? What are you going to do with it kind of scenario.
Well, and I
How
think part of
novel.
that was, I had grown up in Appalachia and I had seen and sort of been surrounded by a group of old church women who fundamentally understood how to take care of each other and frankly how to make a little go a long, long way. And so I had a lot of faith in women in particular, and certainly in poor people to know what they need to do with their lives. And so from there, we are today, just 5 years later, closing in on 4,000 babies. We are in 12 states. We'll be in 14 states by the end of summer, and we're going.
That's
That is
incredible.
amazing. And the last two states that you're looking at, you said you were closing Omaha, Nebraska, and where else?
Yeah, so we just closed Omaha. And what's pretty interesting about Omaha when we were looking at that data is those women were around of an income of about $17,000, which, if you think of that, is pretty darn incredible to be able to try to raise a baby on $17,000 in income. But next up is Maryland and then Arkansas.
Arkansas. Right. Now, and Holly's story, David, you know this, but from I love the description from the end of a long road in Appalachia. You began to think about this country and how things worked.
Well, and I think to me, it's also part of why community has become so important and infusing so much of the work we've done. Because I did just grow up in this little town of 300 people, and everybody knew each other.
Hmm.
And they also showed up for each other, which, I think now of where we are as a country, it feels important to me to be showing up for our neighbors
I grew up in
writ
a,
large.
a small town too called New York City. And
I've heard of
I'm
it.
I'm struck by a couple of things. One, I've in this country, poverty is women's work. It is disproportionately impacts women and disproportionately impacts single mothers. And my mom was one of those. And I think
Mhm.
about all the different hoops we have to go through as a society, as individuals, to get help. And it almost becomes more burdensome than the bang for the buck. You can't work, you have to go to these lines. So when you think about the impact you're having, it's tremendous, not just for the cash you're putting in these people's hands, but talk a little bit about how these women are reacting to not have to write the Magna Carta to get a couple dollars. What does that do? How have you experienced, I would call it dignity in these people
Yeah,
that you're helping?
I would agree with that, David. And I think, what we hear, I would say over and over again, is it gives them the ability to breathe. And I think in that, it's certainly dignity, but it also gives them the ability to feel like they are in charge of writing their own story, which feels very American to me, and feels very much like what we know women and parents of children have had to try to do forever, of really trying to write their own story in this world. But I think that notion of we believe in you so many of the women have said that was a boost of confidence at a point when their self-esteem and their confidence was at a really low point. Because you have this baby, you don't have enough money to buy a car seat to bring the baby home. And thinking about that pressure or that stress, I think it does something to your soul beyond just your pocketbook. And so I think a program like Bridge, where it says, we trust you, we see you, we know you are going to be an incredible steward of these resources. And frankly, you're the best shot this baby's got. And so we
Yeah.
are going to believe in you. I think everybody sits up a little straighter and grows an inch or two.
Yeah, two-thirds of the kids entering foster care in America are because the families are quote unquote neglecting, and that quite often is a euphemism for poverty.
That's right.
And so we've criminalized poverty. We take the kids away. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars each year. This is a much more strategic intervention.
Now, the important thing now is that when you started this, you were the first in the country, you know? I mean, this was a novel, truly novel idea of giving money. And it was 100 babies and mothers, 4,000 now. And is it more than $90 million that you've been able to actually, all of that going to the mothers and the babies?
Yes. Became important is we had started this within our foundation and then we spun it out because we started to see a lot of fellow philanthropists, friends who said, hey, we love this idea. We don't have the time to build the pipes that we were building to move the money efficiently and effectively, but could we kind of get on board with that? And so pretty quickly out of the gate, we ended up doing Connecticut. And it was two donors, a Republican and a Democrat, who came together and said, look, let's try to reach 1 in 5 babies born in Connecticut. And, I think from there, it just continues to grow and continues to build momentum.
And now you have, you were the first, and then others began to believe in this concept of just give them the cash. What, $300, $1,000 a month, depending upon, I think,
It varies.
but for a 3-year period. And now you've created this coalition. So tell us about that.
Well, I think what became important to me is, as much success as we're having, it's still small relative to the need in this country. And so we need to be speaking with one voice as much as we can, or at least coordinated voices in terms of research and policy. So we've created something called the Mother Infant Cash Coalition, which has 39 different organizations in it. And we house it within the Bridge Project, but the members are all over the country doing all kinds of work, not just with babies, but with mothers and children. And what's really important is, can we coordinate our research? Can we learn from each other? Can we be coordinated in advocacy and policy work around the states and ultimately the federal government? And so that's been a real joy to see that come together. And the folks in there are just incredible people working really hard to try to understand, to try to get this message out of, who knew women could be trusted? Who knew when you give them
Yeah.
cash, they do really good things like get out of homeless shelters and feed their babies.
What
I
do you
know.
say when people... Go ahead, Carol.
No. I was going to
I-
say, she mentioned the word homeless or unhoused. There was a special project that you did with the New York City Council, I mean, which was the first time that something like that had happened, where a city actually bought into this concept of and with the unhoused
Yeah,
babies.
this is one of those moments as a New Yorker, I was really proud to be a New Yorker. And so we at Bridge, we're always trying to learn because we know cash works, but there's still so much we don't know of amounts and duration, and always just trying to iterate and learn in different situations and with different groups of people. So one thing we had been seeing in our broad New York work was that we were seeing women. So our only criteria is you have to be 18, pregnant, and below the poverty line, or 150% of the poverty line. And what we were seeing is we had women in the program who were unhoused when they started Bridge. So in some sort of temporary shelter or city shelter. And what we also saw is they started to get out of shelter at very high rates. And in New York City, we have about 2,000 babies born every year. The most common age to be homeless is 1. It cost us as city taxpayers $7,000 a month to house a woman and a baby. And you could guess she doesn't want to be there. And when a child is born into homeless shelters, the chance that they become homeless later in life is significantly higher, with all kinds of other implications. So Adrienne Adams was the city council speaker, first woman, first grandma, first Black woman. I mean, she just got it as a mother and as a grandmother and said, look, let's see what would happen if we actually specifically went after women who are living in transitional shelter and pregnant. And that kicked off our first really deep city council partnership. I'm happy to report we are on the second cohort of that. And it's been fantastic because, again, when you give women cash, one woman said to
Yeah.
us, I think this sort of sums it up. She said, I do not want the address of a homeless shelter to be on my baby's birth certificate. And so you can just bet how hard she was working to get out of that shelter before that baby was born.
What do you say when folks approach you and ask, don't they buy drugs or, eat Cheetos or, some sort of other thing? Because, we can confront people's ignorance with anger or information, but how do you respond to that? Kind of societally, I hear that often enough that we need to be so involved in the decisions of adults in terms of what they spend their resources on to make sure it gets spent right.
Yes. First, in defense of Cheetos, I love Cheetos. Like one of my favorite foods, David. But
Hey, I'm not digging Cheetos, but I hear people say they shouldn't be buying soda and
Show us the
Cheetos. I'm
bag
like,
of Cheetos, David.
I guess
yeah,
we're not going to get
but
sponsored by Yum Foods.
no. It's a common question. You're right. It's a common question. And I was a McKinsey consultant for many years, so I love data. And what is really powerful is when you look at the data across the world, frankly, not just in the United States, with men or women, not just mothers, you see when folks get cash, all of what is sort of the so-called vice spending, which is alcohol, drugs, it can be gambling, it can be pornography, those categories all go down. And the researchers don't really understand why, but what their best guess is back to this hope, which is hard, to measure in a survey. But when folks see that they could reach a goal and that they have an ability to change their circumstances, they want to take that. And so what we see specifically in a lot of the work we've done is things like smoking goes down. Smoking goes down almost across the board when you give pregnant women cash,
Interesting.
which is an interesting public health intervention.
Right.
I think the other question we get quite a lot, David, is like, don't they need financial literacy?
Mm-hmm.
Like, these folks are poor, you're going to give them cash. How do they know what to do with this? We have also a lot of studies that show financial literacy interventions for folks who are very low income are completely ineffective. We spend, a lot of money on it to very little outcome. And I think when I look at the decisions our moms are making every day, I mean, they're trading off, do I buy diapers or do I buy chicken for dinner? They know how to stretch that dollar so much further than I would stretch it and know how to stretch it. So I have a lot of confidence in these folks.
Tell us about the Children's Hub, because that is, so you were about to sign a lease, and I've seen the property, and as a matter of fact, it's going, this wonderful children and families hub, David, is going into my former church when we used to go to church in Washington Heights, the collegiate. So I've seen it. It's perfect for babies.
Yes. Well, and I think this is another one of my passions, back to community that we were talking about. And I think is we continue to figure out where are these third spaces that people are able to gather. Because one thing we hear from our rural moms in Bridge is that they are lonely and they miss people. And so that's harder to solve, community by community in rural America. But in New York City, my hometown, we have a beautiful new space that's going to be very much towards play, but then a whole set of wraparound services for the women of Northern Manhattan. And so I'm really, really excited about that one.
I know, and the community is happy. In fact, some of my friends who still, live there, I said, guess what? You're going to have playground equipment in the front yard of the church. And they said, fabulous. That's so wonderful. So it's a tremendous, and there will be full services. What's I know the open date. You think you can do it in September,
Yeah,
right?
we're going to try to do a soft launch for fall. So the children really need it. And I think there's nothing that motivates us more than when we know we have a community in need. And, that's a community rich in immigrant heritage. And often they are living in very, very small spaces, which contribute to all kinds of development delays for the children because they just frankly don't have room to walk and to crawl and to practice. And so, and we know how important play is for children. So
Yes.
we're
Oh,
really,
David,
I
as
have
a new dad, knows that quite well.
Oh my
right?
goodness. I have a 2-year-old who I learned the phrase tummy time, which is, I definitely had a misunderstanding when I first heard that. Um, when you came from McKinsey, I like that you said that, but truly Appalachia. But you worked at McKinsey, and I work in the private sector as well. How does that inform what you do now? I think there's some sort of weird conception in the public mind that there's this island of misfit toys called nonprofits that are differently governed. And then there's this other thing. And I don't see it that way. I wonder how it informs what you do today and has helped you.
Yeah, I agree with you, David. I don't see it that way either. I will say I use that training every day. I spend a lot of time working with CEOs solving their hardest problems. And I can't think of a harder problem than early childhood poverty in our country, but also it's so solvable. That's
Hmm.
what can make us so frustrated. But I think one skill that I use every day is at McKinsey, we did something called porpoising, where you would go quite deep and understand the facts and the figures and interview a bunch of people and really understand what was going on the ground. And then you need to come back up to the surface and breathe, which is sort of the strategic question.
Hmm.
And I think that we do all day long at the Bridge Project and in these communities we're working in. So we want to be talking to these moms and understanding why only half of them are enrolled in WIC, right? Like all of them should be enrolled in WIC.
Hmm.
What are those barriers? And then we can bring that back up to create advocacy groups and really help them use their own voices to speak to their local or state governments, which is important.
I think my takeaway is porpoising. That's going to be a verb, and I'm going to have to work that into a conversation. But that makes a lot of sense.
So, what is, as I think about all of you need partners. You need a lot of partners to make this work because, in our intro, we said you've given away $90 million in cash, all gone to the mothers and the babies.
Yes.
And I know that your family foundation, you very generously created this, with a $50 million contribution in the beginning. So what other partners do you have?
Oh,
I
so
s-
critical,
Right.
right? So critical. And I think that's been part of the joy in the last couple of years. And they've taken a lot of different paths. So in Boston, a group of women just came together and said, we want to bring the Bridge Project to Boston. They cobbled together a few anchor funders. And so the goal is always if people can raise $2 million over 3 years, we'll bring Bridge into their neighborhood. That gives us 100 moms in someone's backyard. And so that's kind of enough of a nucleus to make it worthwhile. And they were like, we will do this. The women of Boston were like, $2 million, let's go. They have raised close to 6. And we have fully enrolled that cohort in Boston, which is incredible. But I will say over and over again, people have just stepped forward to say, Omaha, you and I were just talking about, the Sherwood Foundation, the Monarch Foundation came together and said, look, we want to really go deep in Omaha. And we've enrolled and we had almost 1,000 applications for 350 spots that went so darn fast. And I think that one's going to be a really interesting and exciting place to watch. But then another partner is in Maryland, which is one of the newer launches that we have coming up. And we're working really closely with Governor Moore's team. And Jen Gates, Melinda's daughter, has been a really important funder there to put some anchor money in. And so I love this idea of public-private partnerships working together for things that we care about in the backyard and the places that we care about.
Yeah.
People today seem to be so cynical. And I think cynicism is a luxury that children in poverty cannot have us afford. And instead of being cynical, you did something. And I think all of us, when we think about what our resources are, what we might do, can do something. And you are kind of the embodiment of that. And I'm not asking everyone to give $50 million to a foundation, but all of us can do something. And if you're confused about what to do, we'll link to this organization and you can step up in some way, shape, or form to support them. So thank you for being the embodiment of anti-cynicism in this country.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Holly, so much for being with us.
Thanks, Carol. Always a pleasure.
Can't wait to see what you do next.